Welcome everybody here, and very much appreciate taking the time out from proposal preparation and whatever else you might be doing to partake in this review. We're going to start with the introduction of everyone on this end of the table, then we'll let the team introduce yourselves. The idea is you always want to have everyone in the room know who your audience is, who you're talking to. A little bit about what their proficiency level is in the subject matter so you know where to pitch your talk, right? So, and for the team members, this is your first stage of receiving feedback from a variety of angles, from a variety of different folks who have different levels of understanding of the subject matter. Each comment is absolutely meant to be constructive, absolutely meant to help you produce a better product that is not complete until 2.5 years from now, right? This is a stepping stone along the way. This is the point where you're launching from thinking about doing something to starting to really do something, okay? So take it all very positively, take it all seriously. There's some situations where not all the input you get, you as a team will agree is useful to advance your project. Critically analyze that, and if you decide to incorporate something, do it. If you decide not to incorporate something, have a good reason why you don't. And just take it all very, very constructively. That's the goal. All right? That being said, with the group, I'm Frank Cole, I'm Director of the Gemstone program, and I really thanks everyone's help and participation in getting this going and supporting this team of 14, which is one of our biggest teams. And Kristen, you want to?
I'm Kristen Scandal, the Associate Director of the Gemstone program.
Okay. And
I'm Marcelo Rivera. I'm Assistant Dean for Education, Innovation, and Technology at the School of Public Health. And I'm also the mentor of those precious.
I'm Carolyn Fink. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Special Education. I taught Ryan in a non-major class, which was an I-series intensive class where we would hope we get students just like you who are interested in disabilities from a variety of perspectives. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you.
And I'm Robin Dassler. I'm the Engineering and Research Data Librarian, and I'm the librarian mentor person for this team. So.
Great. And is there a reason you're sitting back here?
I was told to.
I thought maybe you were going to sneak up and scare us from behind at some point.
Alexa's going to sit there with me.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So that's who you're talking to. All right. And that's who has read your proposal, and we'll give you some feedback. So with that, Team HAPTIC, go to it.
Alright, my name's Oliver, and we're Team HAPTIC, and we're researching a pin-based haptic solution for blind education. Alright, so what's the problem we're trying to address? Right now, there are reported 656,000 around school-age individuals who have some sort of visual impairment, but only around 9% of them have some sort of education geared towards addressing their special needs. Additionally, there are 4 million blind adults out there who have not completed their high school diploma, as opposed to 2 million who have. So this is a problem that continues on in higher education as well. Also, blind students are at a disadvantage when learning visual-based concepts in the classroom, like graph-based concepts. And as a result, it takes them almost twice as long to learn these concepts. And finally, there are assistive technologies out there to help teachers teach these students. But the problem is that a lot of these technologies are too expensive or they're not that flexible. So what are some of these current solutions that are being used? One example is the IVO tablet, and it combines tactile and auditory components. So students can feel and hear what's going on the screen. And this is great because it's multimodal, meaning students can use multiple sensory channels to gather information. And in a study done by the Vanderbilt University, they came to the conclusion that multimodal learning was one of the best ways for students to gather information. However, when we visited the Maryland School of the Blind, a lot of teachers cited problems of programming and lesson plans. It was too hard for them to program in lesson plans. As a result, they didn't want to use this device. A more low-tech solution that's being used right now is swell paper. And Oregon State University described it as essentially regular paper, but with special ink, and when the ink is heated, it becomes elevated and students can feel what's on the paper. And this technology is great because it's a very simple tool. Teachers don't have to do much to use it, but the problem is that it's not refreshable like a screen is. And as a result, the cost in the long run adds up for the cost of the paper. Another solution being used right now is touchscreens that have electrotactile simulation. It's very similar to IVO tablet, but uses different technology for the students to touch what's on the screen. And essentially works by having different applied voltages to the capacitive layer of a touchscreen. So different amounts of voltage is different textures, so students feel different textures on the screen. And in a study, same study done by Vanderbilt University, they came to the conclusion that it's very portable, it's great, but the problem is that there are limited points of contact to only some of your fingertips. And sometimes blind users may want to use more than one fingertip at a time to explore the screen. And finally, there's piezoelectric actuated pin matrices, and this works like a pin arbor with pins that are either raised or lowered, and students can feel the raised pins to determine what's on the screen. And when we visited the National Federation of the Blind, we saw at the Technology Center there that it was great because it was very fast, it was refreshable, really quick to respond, but we actually took this picture here and we saw that it was extremely big and clunky, it's not very practical for students to carry, and it's really expensive. It's on the order of tens of thousands of dollars. So, in summation, there are definitely technologies out there for blind education, but they haven't yet been optimized, and that's what we're trying to do. And now Felix will talk about our research questions.
So our project is broken up into 3 specific aims. In our first specific aim, we're going to be building a device and also developing the software for that device. And we want this device to be able to take 2-dimensional images on a computer screen and be able to translate that into 3-dimensional representations. And we want to see whether this device can accurately represent these 2-dimensional images in a 3-dimensional fashion. In the second phase, we want to verify our protocol for the learning study. So we want to see whether our proposed protocol will be effective and yield results during the actual learning study. And then we'll make tweaks based on what we find during the second phase. In the third phase, we will be doing the actual learning study. So we're going to see if this device that we create and the software will be able to help blind students actually learn material. So our proposed solution for these problems is to create a pin-based device using piezoelectric actuators to move pins up and down to represent these images on a 3-dimensional surface. And we want to target graph-based mathematics. So what we want to do is to be able to take these 2-dimensional graphs and be able to raise pins so that it's displayed and can be filled on a 3-dimensional pin-based matrix. As Oliver said, multimodal devices are better for students to learn, so we want our device to be multimodal as well. So the tactile stimuli come straight from the pins so that the students can explore. We also want to include auditory stimuli so that students can hear from the device what they're learning and what the graphs are supposed to be displaying. And we also want to include visual stimuli so that people with low vision or instructors who are helping the kids use the device can see more clearly what they're teaching. We also want this device to be adaptable for individual needs. So not every child is the same. So we want to be able to tweak our device so that each child can use it as best as they could. So for example, if a small child has like small hands, we want to make sure we use maybe a portion of the screen so that they're not overwhelmed by the amount of information. We also want to find a good balance between cost and functionality of this device. So one big thing is that the more pins we add, of course we're going to get a higher resolution and we'll be able to display these graphs a lot better. But the cost shoots up a lot just from each pin that's added. So we want to find a point where the cost is good enough so that schools can be able to afford this device, and also so that the resolution is good enough so that the information that we're trying to translate is readable. And also we want this device to be portable because, as Oliver said, a lot of these devices that already exist cannot be moved from place to place and they're big and heavy. So we want to make sure that this is something that can be used in a classroom and can easily be integrated into that classroom setting. And now Matt will be talking about methodology.
So our methodology is going to be developed and split into 3 different sections that correspond to our 3 different specific aims. The first being product development, the second being pilot testing, and the third being our final learning study. For our product development phase, we're going to be splitting it into 2 different sections, hardware development and software development. In our hardware development phase, we're going to start with an existing technology that has been created by a German company called Medic AG. Our goal is to acquire that technology and then enter kind of an editing and development phase where we look at it, see what improvements we can make. For example, one is to create the ability to make fluid pin heights, because right now that machine is set at a high and low setting, so something with a few more settings than just on and off. And we want to create the ability to use this and see different graphs based on that height. Outside of hardware development, we'll also be working on software development, and we're going to try to create 3 different modes for this technology. The first being graph mode. In graph mode, an instructor or a blind user, student, will be able to input an equation or a function that they would like to view, and the pins that represent that function will raise so that a user can either tactilely explore it, or a sighted user will be able to see those raised pins. The second mode is sketch mode. This mode will involve a sighted instructor drawing, essentially in a freeform way, shapes they would like to show up on the device, either through a computer or through a tablet that is connected to the device. The pins that correspond to what's been drawn on their screen will raise up on the device. Our final mode was the lesson plan mode, and this represents the main functionality of our device. It will essentially be an almost PowerPoint-style portrayal of different graph modes, where a sighted instructor will be able to program lessons that involve different graphs showing up at different times that you can skip through, just like you would on a PowerPoint, and the ability to include audio to playback if the instructor would like as well for these lessons. And these can be saved, and blind students could go through this and listen to the audio and explore the graphs at home as well. This is an overview of our system. It all starts with the sighted instructor. They're going to be interfacing with our device via the computer. What they're going to see is a graphical user interface. What that's going to do is provide an alternative to the main problem we found with the IVO tablet. It was a really nice solution, but it was very hard to design actual lessons for. So we want to take the advantages of the hardware we get from the piezoelectrics and also learn from what didn't work with the IVO tablets, which really would have been a good solution. So what we're going to build is this graphical user interface that a sighted instructor will easily be able to create lessons from using these software tools behind the scenes that we'll be writing. So that they're not actually programming lessons, they're just kind of creating them like on a PowerPoint. The information from that is then going to be sent through an image processing layer, which is then going to go through hardware translation of the information until the final output is reached at the device via the USB cable. This is where the blind learners will be able to explore the graphs that the sighted instructor would like them to see. Next, we'll have Amelia talking about the rest of our methodology.
Okay, so the next phase of our methodology is the pilot testing phase. So first we go through product calibration, where we don't have any blind users, and we're basically just verifying that the device works as we hoped it would. So this includes the speed of a graph appearing or disappearing, as well as the accuracy of our algorithms. Then we move on to the motor pilot study, where we ensure that blind students can actually use and understand the device. So this is not the learning study, but just seeing if there's shape and line recognition, or if we have to maybe make the lines thicker or something that will allow the images to be clearer to a blind user. Then we go on to the protocol pilot study, where we run the actual study with a limited number, about 3 blind students, in order to verify our protocol and make sure that we don't have to tweak anything before running the full-blown study. Then we'll go into the full learning study, where we'll begin with hopefully about 30 to 40 blind subjects, ages 10 to 12. They'll all be totally blind, either congenitally or by the age of 3. Each student will take a pretest that will test their knowledge of these graph-based concepts that we hope for them to learn. We'll randomize them into 2 groups regardless of their pretest scores, and half of the students will receive an individual lesson with the device where they hear a lecture and they're allowed to feel along on the device, and the other half will receive an individual lecture with the same information but without feeling on the device. Then each student will take a post-test to see whether they have gained any knowledge of the graphical concepts, and a week later they'll come back for a retention test to see whether they retained the knowledge. We'll then go on to statistical analysis, the main one being 2x3 ANOVA, which tests the 2 groups, the control and the with the device group, and it tests them whether there's statistical significance in their test scores over time. Then we'll also do t-tests for individual significant factors, such as if age or gender or congenital versus adventitious blindness affected usage of the device. And we'll also have a lot of user feedback, because even if a student did effectively learn and retain information with the device, we want to make sure that they also like the device and think that it shouldn't have anything else changed to it. So here's our timeline. We've completed the fall 2013, connecting with blind students, teachers, and hardware experts. And we've obviously written our thesis proposal, which you've all read. Currently, we're applying for funding for the device creation portion, and working on a prototype, and currently working on our IRB approval. Next semester, we will be working on software development and our final prototype, and then we'll be applying for grants for the learning study portion and preparing for a junior colloquium. In spring 2015, we'll be doing our pilot study, beginning user testing, and hopefully attending conferences with our preliminary information. And then in fall 2013, we'll finish our user testing, analyze our data, work on our thesis, and prepare for thesis conference before graduation. We have some future directions, thoughts of where we're going sort of more immediately, where we're maybe hoping to, rather than focusing on just blind students, totally blind, aim for a more just accessible device. We're also looking into different hardware solutions, such as electrostatics, which may have been overlooked in our process, just looking at pins. And then we're also looking beyond just graph-based applications to other educational applications for blind students. And then we would like to thank all of these wonderful people who have helped us, many of whom are here. Dr. Fink, Judy and Lloyd Rasmussen, the German team at the You Are Here MAPS team, Medic AG, the Maryland School for the Blind, the National Federation of the Blind, the Gemstone program, Robin Dassler, and Dr. Marcio. And we've got some general questions, but however you guys want to have a discussion go.
That's great. Let's save those for right now, but congratulations, good
Yeah.
presentation.
Just a question, Walter, we just need to clarify who are the German team? Do they know the German people, who they are?
Probably not.
Talking about the Olympics.
The bobsled team, yes, we spoke to them.
We just need to clarify who are those people.
Well, we found some people who had some very interesting research using the Medic device that we were looking into. And it was, I believe, German grad students, and they had worked on a device for the blind that is sort of like Google Maps, so as you move, it's a completely refreshing thing showing you where you are in location to where you want to be. So,
And then we have the meeting with them.
yeah, we Skyped with the Germans.
We met
It's
them
pretty
and
cool.
they have a connection. It's a good learning.
Great. All right, well, we'll come back to your questions, okay? But our tradition is that we get to start, and we usually start with our outside expert first, and then we'll march to the second, then work our way around this end of the table.
Okay, so, questions?
Questions?
Comments,
Comments, questions, anything that you weren't certain about, or any suggestions for improvement, or any non-fixable blunders that they need to cry over?
Okay,
Things like that.
couple of blunders. Oh, no, it was really good. No, don't ever, this is being an educator, you start with positive things. It was very exciting to see you all interested in helping the education for students with disabilities. It's terrific. And I think your last future thing about emphasizing the utility for all students is very current. Universal design for learning is our code word for that. So if you can throw that in and you get points for saying UDL. So that's a good place for future reference. Just a couple of things that as a special educator get my hackles up when I hear. And you've got such great motivation for the study that when you say that only 9% of students with disabilities, students with visual impairments have had adapted education, I think that just can't be. It makes me wonder where that figure is and what kind of study is that, and that's somebody who's really angry. Because since 1975, we've been giving, I don't know, it must be like 90% of students with visual impairments have had adapted education. So I don't know how they defined adapted education, I don't know how they find whatever, but if you're talking to special educators, they would be sad about that. And I really question, like I did. There was another one that said that, in the-
If I could give, does anyone know where that reference came from, or whether that number is,
I'm thinking it
context
may
of
have
that?
been referring to the percentage of students who are in a school for the blind as opposed to receiving adaptive education.
So what you're saying is that only 9% are included in general ed and 91% are in separated programs for kids with disabilities? Is
The other
that what it
way.
is? Other way?
Yeah.
So the kids, so the
That 9% are in a classroom with only other blind students where they're being taught specifically as blind students.
so 91% are. So tell me which.
Start from the top again.
Yeah,
9% are in a classroom with only blind students
okay.
being
Getting
taught.
adapted,
Yeah,
really specifically adapted
Yeah.
education.
And
Well, we
because-
would think, in the special education eyes, we would think a lower number is better.
yeah.
That we are happy that 91% are receiving education in the general ed setting, where you could say that it's much more difficult to individualize and perhaps get them the specific education they need, but we think that they must be getting. So just, it's a tricky number. There was similarly, at the end of right before the research purpose, when you say little research has been done to establish best practices in educating blind students, I think that much research has been done. Not as much perhaps on some of the assistive technology, although that's been a big part of research for people with sensory impairments also. So I think that's just a little strong. You could just say there needs to be more. The research has come to X point and not gotten to where it needs to be. You have such great impetus in terms of the affordability, the usability, I would just concentrate on that and not talk about how the education hasn't worked. There's obviously things we can do better, but, so methodologically, I'm concerned about two things, and I want to hear what you say about it. One is how you're going to define blindness related to visual impairment. And if you're going to have if it's going to be self-identified, if you're going to have a strict 2200 acuity, how are you going to do that?
For the study, we were hoping just to limit it and get rid of confounding variables to have 10 to 12-year-olds who are totally blind, either
So totally means the
What?
the legal definition.
legal
of total-
definition. Okay,
total
so I would say that whenever you're talking about your methodological stuff,
Mhm.
say legal definition,
Okay.
legally, yeah, because the visual impairment is this huge big
Mhm.
umbrella that covers, well, a whole bunch of stuff, so, just make that clear,
Okay.
okay? And, so when you use visual impairment, I would just totally use it in your, like, overview stuff. Don't put it anywhere near your research, because it gets confusing. And the other thing is, the other kind of, in terms of the setting up the study is, I thought you made a really good point that Braille using would make a learner more facile with touch technology. So I don't know if you want to consider that one of the variables to record. 10 to 12-year-olds probably are beginning Braille users mostly, although so much less so now. So if there's somebody whose parent was a huge Braille advocate and those kids are learning, if there's somebody I think you just might want to have them, again, I don't know, self-report
Mhm.
their use of Braille unless you want to test it, because it could be one of those variables in terms of how well they do is how well they learn. And I think I only have one more without looking through stuff, that as the teacher, I would love to see what the lesson plans look like. So when you get to that point, because that's pretty crucial to your measurement. So spend time, I know the technical stuff's probably much more fun, but spend time on that lesson planning to, I guess, make those conditions as equivalent as possible without just like making it dreadful for the control group. And then you may end up having an attention confounding, although I suppose that you could say that that's part of the advantage of tactile. So how long do you think the lesson is going to be around your concept?
We're aiming for as brief as possible to have useful
Yeah.
concepts taught. So 15 minutes to half an
15 minutes,
hour.
okay, 15 minutes and half an hour, 10 to 12-year-olds. Some reinforcements?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, consider reinforcements,
Yes.
consider setting, you want to get the best lesson possible. So just consider the elements of lesson planning. I'm glad to look at a lesson plan when you do it.
Have you all subdivided into subgroups yet, who's going to tackle what?
Not
Well,
yet.
I'm pretty much sure for that. Some groups have already decided where they're gonna split up. But, you know, the earlier you do that, so you can really get focused. For example, lesson plan development, people can really focus on that and get it done properly. And get your experts' help with that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'm glad to consult on lesson planning. I think that's my last thing. I just have to say, and Ryan knows I'm gonna say this, but I think that in this context, you can get away with blind student and blind adult. Just know that it's argued about is there's a blind pride, but professionally, we try to say the person first. Student with visual impairment, particularly if you use visual impairment, it's easy enough to say person with visual impairment. Person who is blind is awkward and probably not so standard. So I think you can get away with blind student, but when you use visual impairment, say person with visual impairment. And then you're not just seeing them as this sensory disability, you're seeing them as a person with this little side issue that is interesting.
Just had this conversation on the lab meeting before I come here, that the person has the problem have the person.
Right, and
So you don't say blind person, you say the person who is blind.
right. And it's totally in subculture, out of subculture phenomenon.
Parkinson's disease is the same thing, you say PD patients.
Yeah, right. And it's shorthands and.
The disease doesn't have the patient has
Right,
Parkinson's.
right, it's really that is the concomitant, and they, if you're if you're a person who has a visual impairment, you're welcome to call yourself a blind person. You know, when you're inside the group,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, but on the outside the group, we tread a little more cautiously,
Sensitive.
yeah.
So this is important when you're presenting your formal work, but it's also very important when you're recruiting participants, when you're talking to families, when you're trying to convince a larger population that's very diverse of what the motivation and what the purpose of your work is. So it's very important.
Ask the AFB people what you should do when you're sending out, ask them for editorial
It's
help.
not people who work at AFB.
There you go, we do it all the time, professional shorthand, there's no, the people who work at the AFB, ask them how you should address the larger group. Because I think with the hearing and the blind communities, those are the only exceptions.
Mhm.
Everything else, autism, everything else, you have to say the person first. I would stand on the table and make you do it. But those two, there's some shades. So check with again, your consumers to see, especially when you write the letter of recruitment stuff.
But on the thesis, we're gonna use the way that needs to be, like a person who is blind. But you don't have to write down blind subject.
Yeah, blind person, it's just so much.
You never know who's
clearer.
gonna read.
Yeah, all right, you can decide.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll let you.
it's decided.
Yeah, it's decided, okay, go through, it's a word check.
And you will be, I mean, this is
Politically
never a finished product. You will be evolving, improving it, adapting it as you go through it. Any reactions?
Last thing.
Sure.
Did the people at the AFP give you any idea, or the people at the School for the Blind, did they tell you that 30 to 40 kids, 10 to 12-year-olds is gonna be possible? That's a largest number.
At the School of the Blind, we had, asked them if they were willing to participate or help us out, and the principal, the dean, was very protective, so it's unlikely. So as for the participants, that's a very iffy number. That's our ideal, but
It's gonna be high, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We discussed
it's
a little bit
unlikely.
the number we're aiming for, but,
yeah.
and also they're aiming to go there and collect data inside the school, which is different than bringing the children here on campus.
Well, when we went to the School for the Blind, they were already participating in 3 different research projects with students.
See, that's what I'm saying, there is tons of research going on.
Yeah, and parents need to give consent forms. Some parents will say, no, I don't want to participate. We participate in so many studies. But there will be some limitations involved.
It was advised by the principal that we should consider having sighted people just blindfolded, but that isn't the same results at all for our study. So, but she was giving that as a helpful advice, but it wasn't.
You could conceivably have a third subgroup and make your group smaller. You could conceivably have it might be an interesting piece of information. So you think you're gonna go public school then, probably?
Well, because our device, we wanted it to be able to be integrated very seamlessly into a public classroom where
Yeah.
students don't have to be separated into separate special ed classroom, they can just be in the normal classroom and use the device and learn with the other students.
Yeah, so you think, so that's meaning that answer is yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, then you know that for, at least for PG, you'd have to get the background checks. I think Montgomery County, you don't have to. I know Howard County you do, and Howard County is hard to get into. Montgomery County usually is pretty doors wide open. PG would be doors wide open with the background checks.
I just did one.
Yeah, you did. Okay, so, and if you have, yeah, so if you have missionaries who have the background check. The problem with PG, did you do it in PG?
No, I went to STAMP and then they had someone who was doing
For PG?
Yeah.
Because some of the districts, it's really stupid and it'll change soon, but they are specific to the district in some cases.
It's an incentive to work with AREC because
That's why.
and they work in PG on the
Okay.
campus. So
Okay, good.
if you volunteer or work with them,
With what?
America Reads, America Counts.
Oh, really?
It's also just really fun. You should do it.
Yeah.
All of you.
Yeah, I've been, anyway, that's great, it's very exciting, good work.
Great. Any reactions you want to get off out of your mouth right now, or you want to hold on to?
Do we want to wait until we hear all of your feedback?
We're gonna wait.
Okay.
Okay. Mark, you want to go? Yeah, some questions?
Oh, it's hard for me to have so many questions because I have been with them for a
Right.
while, but thank you so much for your comments. I think I appreciate very much. And I do have questions. I keep provoking them with some questions.
Good.
For the specific aim 1, I know we are, as a future directions, we have the decision that we have to do about deciding which technology we're going to use. So, so you guys don't kill me after this question just came up in my mind today, as if we're supposed to have our meeting today. But do we know, I'm going to include we because I do not know, but do we know what technology people who is blind, do they prefer? Like, do you know what are the preferences in terms of use? Instead of like shifting the question to the point that which device do you think we suggest you to use, which technology to use, and which one we think is going to be good for them? But shifting the question to know, do you have any study that show that they have preference for which technology? That would be my question for the specific area.
We tend to only have information about what adults prefer, which means either it's adults who are blind and what they prefer in their daily lives, or it's educators. And I know there's someone who went to one of the School for the Blind. You guys had some information about what's useful.
Well, there is more.
So when you talk about educators, that the one that they prefer, do they prefer because it's easier to program the lessons, or it's easier because they know that the user and the end user prefer it?
It's probably more the latter.
Even though a lot of the School for the Blind, the teacher who was there, he was very focused on the ease of use, because he said when we came to his classroom, he only had like 6 students, but it was very hard to control them. Like, they were very antsy, they just wanted to play and stuff like that, and he wanted to make sure that he can get a lesson and give it to them and have them do it rather than having to fiddle with it a lot. And I think that's how he measured the degree of the technology's success. Because
how quick he can just program the lesson and
that's why
deliver the lesson.
he really liked, there was this paper, do you remember what it was called? It was this like parchment kind of paper. No. It was parchment paper, and you press really hard on the paper, and then it like holds its shape, and you can feel
Yeah,
it.
we brought to the group last time. Yeah, we had last time.
So he really liked that, because he's just like, I just give them the paper, they can draw.
Which is interesting perspective, because who is teaching wants to have a technology that works, not like us that sometimes have to go to the lecture hall and spend 30 minutes figuring out how to put a PowerPoint. Right?
Yeah.
So we get frustrated because we have nothing to do with this, but we get frustrated because we don't know how to make Xpanel to work well for us, and it takes longer than 10 minutes that we have to switch class. But you have to think on the end user, but also have to think who is going to deliver the lecture or the class, the lesson.
He was just one teacher though, so I don't have a study off the top of my head that can prove it.
But one thing that we should consider is what the end user prefers. But you can prefer whatever. You can prefer apple or orange, but the person prefers.
Yeah, you could look
pineapple.
beyond, you could look at any educational technology studies, and they would have that user feedback. And I bet it'll confirm what you say, that ease of use is high on the priority list.
I know that because math is related to Nemeth code, and that's in a Braille style, then pin-based kind of technologies would make sense. Because if you're doing graphs, it's only natural to have equations as well.
Okay. So the specific show. We have calibration and we do have also testing, some pilot study going on there, right? To what extent the group is willing to, in order to get it done, to get the hardware, that you don't have to develop the hardware, have a hardware like halfway developed, but work on software. And then we can do to the interesting learning study. So to what extent the group is willing to be flexible on that or not? That's my question. Or build from scratch a brand new hardware.
I think the most flexible phase is the learning study, simply because, like you said, we're going to have trouble finding that many participants anyway. A lot of these studies are already a case study, or maybe 3 people or something. So it would probably, while we want to have all the results of that, that could be a shortened part. And then the other end that we're thinking of shortening is, as you said, less on the hardware and more on the software. But I think the importance of the calibration and pilot studies is never gonna go away.
Yeah, never gonna go away, but building the hardware from scratch can take you up to more than a year and can be a risky factor on the timeline. That's
So at this point, I'm thinking that right now we don't quite have the right expertise in the team to build hardware from scratch, because we don't know all the options offhand, and we don't really know quite how to start from scratch and build an entire working device. So there would be a lot of time lost when there are existing devices that we could use, and assuming we get grants money to pay for devices, or at least trials of the devices, we can test each device and see which is the best direction to go, which I think would save us a lot of time.
Brian's got it.
All right.
I just want to make sure that you guys are aware about that having this conversation is important, because otherwise you're going to just have this dream, and then when reality kicks in, because the proposal is great, and now reality is going to start kicking in, and you're going to get a lot of stress.
This is a kick and pack.
Well, and I think that your great idea of having the different height pins, you could still have that out there as part of an ideal, even if you guys don't develop just instead of on off. I think that's, somebody might after they see that idea. And I think also you could conceivably do a single subject design, on treatment, off treatment, over a couple of kids, and you might have a better chance actually finding those kids.
So the third last question would be, can you put the slide on the learning study?
Yes.
One thing that would be interesting, and you guys know that I'm all over this thing, right? That's my favorite part.
Good job, mate.
You guys know that. The learning study, I'll be interested to know, because you're going to have to do repetitions on the lessons, right? So now they're going to have not one lesson, but you have lessons. Correct or not?
It's
Conceivably.
They don't learn, but they don't learn in one time. You're going to test this several times, right? So we need to figure out a way to do a statistical within this part. Just because comparing pre-test and post-test is great. But for doing the statistical part within each time that they repeat the task, so they are learning, is when you can plot the learning curve. And the learning curve can be much more helpful and informative, like can give much more information than just the pre, post, and retention. So how they are learning will be, this question will be responded by looking at the plots as they are in the process of learning. So for that, you just probably have to review, if you're going to include that analysis, you have to review the statistical forward-fitted measures.
I'd like to ask Dr. Fink's opinion, because I'm thinking kind of in terms of kind of a learning plan for the, if we're doing multiple lessons, and then doing a pre-test and a post-test. Would it be best to say do a kind of overall pre-test, and then have parts of that be each individual lesson with, say, a quiz at the end, and then another cumulative post-test and a similar cumulative retention test, or would there be
You
some
could, that's
other?
kind of a unit plan.
Okay.
Yeah, you could do that.
But what I'm assuming
Depends
that
on the skill that you're teaching, how it divides up.
Yeah.
but what I'm assuming for the sake of testing, that you're gonna have one task, and this person needs to do the task over and over again eventually.
Okay.
We're hoping to have simple graphs because most of these students at this age have not come in contact with really any graphs, line graphs at least. But hoping to cover a couple different things. Some, like probably the simplest is slope, seeing as that is very easily felt. But things such as like coordinates and hitting the zeros and things like that, which would allow for us to, if we had multiple lessons, maybe hit on the easy thing first, and that way that the retention test would be the start of the next lesson. You do a test and then you do another lesson, and then you the next week do another test just to see the progression of it, I guess.
I think that's a part of this study that we need to discuss further in this fight, how this protocol is gonna be and how it's gonna be.
Yeah, and I was wondering when you're, and not the math, so you're teaching the math and the graphing, so it's, you're not just like vocabulary and identifying different, so you know, it would be easier if you just did like identity things, like this is slope, this is, rather than, yeah, recognition things, rather than the math part.
Concept.
Yeah, but it depends on what you're trying to do.
I have a question. So, in terms of delivering tests, so if the students learn with the device, which raises and lowers their graphs, when we give them a test to test graph-related concepts, can we print out like raised?
Yeah, that's,
So-
I don't know, that's an issue with getting equivalency. Because if you're asking them to perform using the device, then it changes the task a lot to then have it be an oral response
That's
instead of
what
a,
we call contextual variability.
yeah,
And
that's,
besides testing retention, when you test retention, Drea, you can provide a different, completely different out of the what you have tested and see what's going to be the outcome. So you change the context, so you increase variability in the context and see if they can adapt from what they have learned in the device and test to a different thing.
So would we then
That's
like?
a contextual variability. I can send you papers to talk.
Yeah,
So-
it's not a trivial aspect, I mean, it
No.
needs to be factored in very
Just
discreetly
reinforce.
into your methodology.
But just reinforce learning, that you can really say that they learn because they can adapt to
But
it.
is it fair then to compare, let's say, the group that only learns by listening to take only a test by listening versus listening and feeling to test that's listening and feeling?
Yeah, it's fair.
It's fair?
It's whatever it is, it's a method. If equipment is efficient, it's going to be great.
Alright, Kristen, you want to ask a question?
Yes, so kind of building off of that, how did the team explore, assess, and integrate scholarly resources into your proposal writing process?
Anyone?
Anyone wants to go?
I think a big part of it was just finding out what hardware is out there, because a lot of our research, because we came into this project assuming that kind of the need was for hardware, and then we realized that it's all been tried, and more of the need is for applications for it. So that was a lot of our literature review, just seeing different ways it's been applied and what hardware solutions have been made.
The literature we've looked at is very twofold. There's a lot of it on the hardware, like Emily was saying, but a lot of articles we've also looked at have been about education with people that are visually impaired and different ways to teach those people and different strategies. So there's kind of like two distinct halves to the research we looked into.
And how did you find those papers?
A lot of it was through is it IRBnet that we have? Is that a thing? No, that's not the thing that I'm thinking of. No, there's one of those things that has a net on the end of it. You know it probably. But,
A lot of our research
And
comes
Google
from
Scholar
the
as well.
UMD databases as well.
Also, like NFC and sites like that had a lot of links to research articles where they got their statistics from, where they got their information.
Okay, on the library theme, you want
Yeah, so I do like that you guys are like you said, your research kind of has this sort of twofold approach to it, and I feel like you're one of the teams that has actually been pretty decent about putting in sort of more of the people parts of this. I think a lot of times there's teams that come more from an engineering background or something, and they're like, woohoo, we have everything going on about, you know, the product or something, and then we're gonna do some stuff with people, and it sort of gets ignored. So you guys have done a good job of trying to design your studies and stuff. That being said, reading through the proposal, it was structured very well. You had a lot of good information in your initial literature review, and then you kind of got to some of your stuff about your study design and like your methodology, and the citations just kind of stopped. So I'm curious. I actually have a question for the Gemstone folks about this. Do you want them citing like where they get basic like statistical tests and that kind of stuff too? Because like you wouldn't normally. But I didn't know if since I was supposed to be unfamiliar if they need a document where they're getting that kind of stuff. Okay, we're good there. So don't worry about that part. But I know there's a couple places I think in talking about the study where you would make a few little claims like that. I just pulled one out that was something about, of course, since it's a study, students are informed differently than they would in school, that kind of stuff, and that there's some. That's really, I guess, my only complaint about any of the literature use is that there's some parts where you're sort of not talking about why you're taking a particular thing into consideration with your study design. So like you sort of talked earlier in the paper about general issues and educating students who are blind and that sort of thing, and then as you get farther down into sort of the general how one designs a study for use in a school, you kind of didn't necessarily address what fed into that. But I mean, it was very detailed otherwise, so I'm sure you looked at something, so it's just
It's
sort of
really
making
good
sure you pulled
paper.
it in.
Is that collaborative writing? It's like, that's really hard. Yeah, so good job on that.
Were you guys, I know there's at least one team that I was working with that had, they had like a person designated to do all the editing stuff. Was that you guys or something?
You have a master editor?
Emily's done a lot of the compiling.
Okay. Well, very.
I thought it was a great idea. I have a master final editor.
Yeah, sort of one person who's like
Hold
in charge of
the
like making sure
together.
things. Yeah, so that's good. And the only other thing, this kind of tied in with I think what your last question was up there. You also described in your study kind of how you were going to do your protocols and everything. You talked about how at some points you were going to also get feedback from the students who use the device, kind of open-ended feedback. And when you were actually talking about your data analysis, the vast majority of your discussion of your data analysis was all about your statistical data you were going to pull off of this, which is good. But you sort of didn't really address how you were going to deal with that open-ended feedback. And I think the last question you had on your last slide was something about what are things that you think might take us a long time. That tends to take people a lot longer than you think it will. There's always this kind of assumption that, and then people are going to write in answers, and we're going to just read them, and it's going to be awesome. And usually there's a lot more kind of what categories of responses fall into. There's a lot more kind of like stuff you have to do with that. So like response coding and that kind of thing. So that might actually get more complicated than you think. But of course, if you wind up with not that many students in your group, it might work out. I don't know, but just plan for that to take a while. So.
Do you think it's reasonable with not much time to have that sort of as a, not an afterthought, because we recognize the importance, but as more of a conclusion, we've done the research, and now for anyone reading this, this is the feedback we got, which then sort of paves the way for people doing future research? Because I don't know if we'll have time to really adjust for the feedback we get.
Yeah.
You mean the questionnaires that you want to run?
Yeah.
You don't have to include this data into the study because it's not part of what you're testing specifically. You can do it as appendix, and you can do a collection of all the comments and just refill in your study. Because remember, your specific aim does not aim to test specifically what's the user feedback on a particular device. That's not your specific aim.
And you could put it again in your future project to really assess user feedback.
Okay, could you bring your questions for us
Yes.
back up again? I'll make sure we get to those. We actually have another group we got to jump to in 4 minutes.
Oh, jeez.
It's been an hour already.
Wow.
We'll make sure we get those covered. And then while we're all kind of looking at that, I'm going to mention something about your budget. It's
Somebody's looking at it.
a budget of $16,500 for this project sounds totally reasonable to me. But most of it's tied up in travel.
Yeah.
That's something we will negotiate when the time comes. Just so you're thinking rarely, well, not really, never does a team this size all travel to a conference. So you have to be drawing straws or flipping coins or doing some reason to figure out how we can send a subset. And we will gladly support you as best we can to go to a conference if you submit an abstract, if you get accepted, if you're part of the formal program. We don't support anyone to go just because, hey, cool conference, let's go. If you're presenting, poster, orally, however you're presenting, we'll do all we can to get you there, a part of you there.
Yes.
And you're going to have something important to say. So make sure that your abstract has to be enticing enough to get you invited to the program.
For these smaller things that are just poster things and it's like, take the metro to DC, is there any sort of reimbursement for like poster printing? Or
Yeah,
anything like
yeah, that's kind of stuff we can help out,
that? Okay.
absolutely.
And the second floor of the library has, McKeldin has that poster, the large format
Oh.
printer and stuff, and I want to say it's pretty competitive price-wise, it's cheaper than Kinko, so,
Nice.
to do that.
Okay, and when you figure out what your hardware approach is, that's gonna be a big adjustment to your budget.
Mhm.
So, and I like the conversation I heard about not trying to build it from scratch. I mean, that's not doesn't need to be the point here. The point is using the technology to test the teaching. Yeah, good. Okay, let's make sure we have those answered.
Can you guys send me the PowerPoint? I feel like I could answer some of those, but not in 4 minutes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We're down
Yeah.
to 2 now, so.
Yeah, so 2 minutes, you give me less chance. You can send me those, I can.
And the space is available, so you're welcome to stay.
You're welcome to stay, we just have to go
and
down the hall to the
chat.
other room.
Okay. And do you all want, like, editorial stuff?
Yeah, if you have it available, I'm sure they would love to have it.
Okay, it basically says what I said, but
Okay.
in context.
All right, so I will let you all can stay as long as you wish.
Yeah.
But don't feel like you compelled to stay the whole evening, because they'll keep you here, especially summer. But, I mean, your offer for responding to those questions specifically is wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so I know Chris and I have to jump down the hall. So we're gonna cut it off here for the formal part of it, but y'all did a great job. I think your thought process has come a long way. I was really worried that you guys were hung up on building the pin box. And I was worried that they're just gonna fight over building this box. But you're going beyond that, which is great. I mean,
Think out of the box.
Think
Think
beyond
No.
So that's where the cool stuff is. Okay, so good, glad to see that. Well, good job. Go find some money.
Yeah.
Hey, Dr. Cole, do you have any money?
I think Dr. Fink has some resources
I
for
have
you.
one.
Oh.
Potential. I don't know if you contacted the Columbia Lighthouse for the blind.
Oh, I volunteered for them over the summer.
It's a local source
Guess who's
that
asking?
might have funding, and we have a contact.
Fantastic.
Lovely.
Thank you very much, good job.
Thank you.
Referred by this person.
You want to keep this while you
Do
chat?
they need it?
I have another one for them.
If we could keep it, that would
Yep,
be
so if
great.
you just can hit the record button and turn it off,
Yep.
and then put that in the HDMI cable in my office or James's office, that'd be great.
Okay.
And I'll recommend the clicker behind you that you all could have used, and that USB.
Oh.
Next time, it also
Sorry.
has the, although it doesn't really work on the screen.
Yeah.
Alright.
Oh, well.
Now we're jumping into attention deficit rats.
Yes, thank
Also
you.
very
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah, rats is attention deficit.
It's really a
That should
turn
be
anyway.
it. Thanks.
Okay, guys, I have a few minutes. Do you want to pick 2 questions? Come on, you have questions that I have for you guys there.
We have our 2 main things we're sort of grappling with at the moment are what sort of hardware, like medium type of device, and then the other one is whether we're designing this very specific for this very specific purpose, very specific audience, or whether we're going for more accessibility universal design.
Oh, that's really tricky. If you do the existing pin machine, are you guys giving up on the cost thing, right? Is that kind of, because that's an expensive device, is that? so
We're not
it's-
fairly
You don't have to buy the device.
Yeah, and plus one of your goals is like really,
Yeah, if we were to go without the device, it would really affect that goal of ours.
Right.
It's
Right.
something that could actually be implemented realistically in many classrooms.
The device that was in the PowerPoint, I mean, we actually saw it in real life, it was like around $40,000.
you know, my friend, who some of you saw, had a smaller one.
The Braille note.
Yeah,
But unfortunately, the Braille note, its features are limited and
And it's
its
all
height
text.
is very small.
and it's probably all text.
We are aware of one by Metagage, a smaller version. It's 30 by 32. It's actually the same size they used for the You Are Here Maps study that we
Yeah,
referenced.
right.
That was, they said, around €9,000, so about $12,000.
That's,
Yeah.
That's doable.
It's doable for
you all, but
us,
it's not
but
doable
not
for
for,
us.
yeah.
It's not doable for
Oh,
some
yeah.
people.
So part of making it
But,
ourselves.
but you know that people who have visual impairments have access, many, to personal money, to like wheelchair money, it's the same kind of thing. They can get personal devices, they can get it covered by Medicare,
Mhm.
you know, they can, so you don't have to like totally think that those devices are not useful. They would travel with the person, they wouldn't be the teacher's device, they would be the person's device.
I think an idea maybe we started to pursue more recently was the applications with electrostatic displays instead, because those are cheap. They're not like regular tablets. They're very easy to light, to carry around.
Yeah, especially you're saying if the difference between one finger and a couple fingers.
It's
You know,
not that bad of a
can be
trade-off.
trained. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, just learn that. You know, if it's something that's less expensive, again, I think that might be.
We found a study that Disney did actually.
It was Kristen, who I saw at another meeting, mentioned this.
And in that study, they referenced this company that they got their actual electrostatic display from. So we went to that website, and like the most expensive thing we could find on the website was $2,000, and most stuff was around $500.
Yeah,
Great.
we also consider the fluidity of a line, because a line obviously is continuous, and if you use pin-based, you have separations in between each pin that may or may not,
Yeah.
affect how the student
So that
understands
would
line
that's
continuity.
avoided in the electrostatic.
Yeah.
There are issues with like accuracy sometimes because it's not it's virtual technically, right? So
Guides.
I don't know. On a tablet you probably wouldn't, but there are studies and it works
Yeah.
okay. It's just it's not physical like the.
Do they with those are they programmable? I mean, it's,
Yeah.
so you still have that ease of
Oh,
instruction.
I mean, most of the pros of the electrostatics address many of the issues that we have with it.
It's not too complex to do, but it's less intuitive for us to
Yeah.
think. Like, obviously, pins are the most intuitive thing. We
Yeah.
know how it would work, so it's
Yeah.
just a little daunting to think about starting into something where you can't see it happening. It's just happening. and
One
we don't-
other reason why we like the electrostatics.
I'm just thinking like if we like get something and just play with it,
Yeah.
that will make it easier to
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
conceptualize.
So one other reason why we like the electrostatics right now is because we were thinking of like an ordinary classroom in a public school system, and many of them right now have smart words, and teachers teach on smart words, especially math concepts. And if we could somehow hook up our system to that smart board, so that whenever the teacher draws something, it shows up, then that's what. And it's fast enough in electrostatics that we could do that. I mean, we have to play with, of course, there's a lot of research into like the delay and everything like that, but I feel like it'd be more feasible to
That's really
do the
visible.
electrostatics.
That really gets you connected. You were worried about not seeing pins. That's really, I think that would be great. I think that would be really, really good. So that, I would concentrate, if you're talking about UDL or targeted, I would say targeted is your main priority. And then that UDL is an add-on. And the nice, and it's like a part of the pitch. But really usefulness, you can continue to do, focus on the people with special needs, people with visual impairments are so behind. You know, that, you know, there might be an additional set of people who don't learn, who need the visual, you know, who need the same kind of technology who would improve their learning. So you can always kind of add that, but don't worry about targeting towards that.
And when we find studies that have done, like, obviously our study isn't testing all the capabilities of the thing. Like, the biggest function, as we were talking about with the software, is the pre-programming lessons, and that's not what we're testing really that much in the study. It's really just kids using it to find lines and stuff. But when we find research that has done basically identically that with both the pins and the electrostatics, is that a problem with our research, like our learning study part of it? Or is that just reinforcing the research that's been done?
No. Depends on the question that you have for that.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you really want to answer?
I mean, I guess the studies we found, it is those teams that are way more engineering focused, and then as a side note, there's people, and then it's shape recognition a lot more, and they're just like, okay, we've done this, designing this whole thing and all the hardware and software, and now, oh look, a person can find a line on it. So it's less user oriented. So, I mean, It's just in terms of whether we're doing something different enough in our study that it's not replicating a study, even if we know that the device's capabilities are going beyond
Well,
the
weren't you
study.
saying that most of the things that you've seen tested are adults? Isn't the fact that you're testing them on kids hugely not replicating?
So there was one study in particular. It was an NSF grant given to a University of Wisconsin, I think, and their goal. And again, I don't know how much they completed, but I know that a master's student wrote his thesis on this. And they were targeting a much more holistic approach to it. So they were taking into consideration old, young, blind, visually sighted, all these different components. Now, the success of that is a different issue as to like how much they got, but I know that it was funded by NSF and that was their goal.
There is so much thing that you can do on your learning experiment that we have not discussed further that can bring novelty to this project that you guys have no idea. I know right now we're in the process of the beginning, which is developing the hardware and getting the software up and running and testing and calibrating everything. There's so much that can be done as a learning experiment as well that, as I said, there's not much that has been done, but can be very unique. So I don't think you should be worried about replicating only what has been done. I will not be worried about this. There's a worldwide
Are you worried
of
that
fashions to explore.
are you worried that haptic is just cool and the touch is just not as not as exciting?
It does seem the research is split into very simple stuff that's not about it being cool, but about functionality,
Yeah.
and it's just the really simple,
Yeah.
can a person recognize a shape? And it's really more about the engineering. And then the other half of it, because corporations don't make things for blind people, because
Right.
that's not a big enough market,
Yeah.
is the Disney stuff, where they're making with electrostatic stuff that we could not in our entire lifetimes ever figure out how to make, because
Yeah.
we're not Disney.
Yeah.
But so they're doing really cool stuff that we're not capable of, but it's not for any market, it's for mass.
But the importance of
consumption.
you guys doing some experiments, testing out, for example, the learning ability of the device itself and the learning ability of the concept itself. Only the distinction of these two things, or just as I said, you can learn the lessons. There's a cognitive component learning the concept, but there's also a motor component that you have to learn how you a two-use
Yeah.
testing or learning curve that needs to happen.
Yeah.
And this distinction, there's several things that you can explore that you guys are not having this conversation yet. So I will not worry much about using a device that's
Okay.
been halfway developed.
And it sounds like from your research so far, you've identified that there is a gap here. Because in your whole description of it here, you talk about how there's sort of this hardware side of it and then this sort of other mass
Right.
market side of it,
Right.
but nobody's doing this pretty piece that we're
For-
doing.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
that's really, as long as you have some sort of identifiable gap that your research is trying to fill, then it's fine to take some other people. That's synthesis. That's what everybody does with thesis. It's fine.
And as a mentor, I would say, grab this study that has been done, study it until the end, and find all the pitfalls and just
Yeah.
tell them how bad they were and move forward. That's what you have to do. That's what your job has to do. It's horrible when you have I have happened to me that you finish a research, a study, and then somebody just published something very similar and say, oh, I have been working on this for 2 years, and now somebody just published an experiment very similar to what I have done, right? Then when you read in details, you get out of your racket mode, and you read in details, say, this is not what I want to do. There's some that here that I have done so much more things. So you can really use that paper as your hook to just go and build your study on top of it. That's how you do it as a scientist. That's how science evolves.
Well, I think you can still really do all the stuff that you're talking about with tactile learning and the relationship of the device to the person that is sciencey and interesting, even if you're not doing the product development part. I think there's enough there to tease out the science part. And math learning. You've got all that too.
And I also agree with what Dr. Marsh is saying, because with the papers, typically pre-test, post-test, see how the scores have changed. But really, it has a lot to do with learning the device. And so if we could kind of have at individual times how they're performing, that would be really important as well. That would be something different from previous studies.
Or even the contextual variability that we discussed here. What if you don't have the device? I'm still getting the concept, I still have to. So when I don't have the device, I still having I can still learn from different ways. I can transfer, what's basically transfer, from what I have learned with the device to other ways, to other contexts that I can learn. There are several things that can be done.
And maybe if you cannot use the students from the School for the Blind, you can mine some of their teaching, math teaching, planning kinds of things in terms of what student responses work really well, and particularly the non-device responses. I think they would have a lot of information about that.
How much information do you think like PG County or Montgomery County schools would have on like devices in the classroom for blind students?
They all have vision teachers who would be really good. I have a vision teacher who I really like. So let me.
I have you.
Yeah, but I don't have it. I think vision teachers would be the ones who would. You're asking for like teaching information?
Yeah. Like what do they know, like, need,
Right.
whatever?
Yeah, I know a couple of vision teachers. I'll send you a.
We were also concerned about having a control, like we realized that the control of a blind student in a classroom, a mainstream classroom, they tend not to get, even in a mainstream classroom, their information all just through lecture. So I don't know at what point we're making a really biased control group. But we also don't want to give them swell paper and have.
Yeah, they would help with that too. You could say, how would you teach this lesson to a student with visual impairment without using a device? And they would have some strategies to use. I think just oral lecture would be a killer. I mean, then, you'd have to have something else.
So perhaps we could have, rather than trying to have the scripts of the lessons be identical and then one with the device and one completely without it, we could have one that's adapted lecture so that it's at least somehow helpful for a blind student, and the other just lecture but with the assistance of the device. Because we also didn't want to give them swell paper or something that's used now and then find that our thing is identical because it's still the same, you're feeling a thing. So.
If it's identical, the results is still good.
Right.
Yes, that means we're just as good.
We like that
Still good
hypothesis.
results. Be careful not being so biased.
Yeah, and if like a vision instructor were to say we normally use swell paper, then we should probably do that for our
Yeah,
physical.
right, I would say.
Yeah,
that
we
would-
should make it as close to how it's actually taught as possible.
How feasible would it be to get help from, say, a vision teacher for use during the learning study, like to have them be the one to teach the lesson? Because I think that would be much more helpful than one of us who don't necessarily know
But that's
how
what
to
should aim for.
teach.
Yeah,
But I do have a concern about this.
Or you
Can
could,
share
no,
with
or
her?
you could have them teach you to teach.
That is
That-
probably
Rather than, I mean, because.
Because we need the same person teaching every single one of them, like full-time, and we'd have to pay that person.
Yes.
But I think, I would think that they would love to consult and say, this is what you would do. I mean, and that's kind of the cool thing that you guys would learn, would be some teaching skills. Yeah.
You can be trained on, right?
Yes, yes. I mean,
I do have, I had a question, I want to hear your opinion on that. Remember what was my question about teacher?
What?
So I want to hear your opinion on that.
Okay, hold on, let me get that, I've already lost my vision teacher. Referral.
Oh.
Remember?
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Is he about to wreck?
No, I think there is
Okay, go
a,
ahead.
this is my philosophical concern about this, right? So the coolest thing on this project, that they're doing like includes a device that can help people who are blind to learn. But they are excluding the possibility of having a teacher who is blind to teach the blind. So they're accounting for the teacher who, a sighted teacher, to use a device to teach blind. So how often, my question is how often, I do not know this. There's a philosophical problem here, which is the device itself is excluding a possibility. But I would say how often you have, or how much a blind person who is blind will prefer to learn from another blind or to
I think it's probably like less than two. I've never known a vision teacher who had a visual impairment.
I told you.
Yeah, it's like, it's like below.
And the reason I'm asking, because I came from also a background when I used to teach deaf students, and I know there is a difference in the school
there's
deaf. There's a huge difference
deaf community.
With the deaf community, if they're learning from a deaf person or from, and I was wondering if
not the
this
same.
happened and the same thing, and it's my, I have the philosophical question in my head, but I was
It's
wondering
interesting,
the
and I can
context.
ask, I can ask people who know particularly if there is any kind of bias like that, and I just don't think the achievement, possible achievement, difference is greater with visual impairments. The learning outcomes without vision is just so much lower that, it just doesn't occur.
And I know that historically it's been
Yeah.
one way, but
Yeah, it's
eventually
not
they're
even
gonna go to.
historically, it's not even, I just, I can't, it's hard to become a teacher.
Mhm.
So I can't even, in my experience, I've never seen a teacher with a visual impairment, get through teaching, and maybe they don't want to after.
I have had a professor who
struggling in
was blind.
school. Yeah.
Really?
I had a professor in class who was
Yeah.
blind,
Yeah.
and we were like 25 students, and every time that one opened the door, he's gonna say, "Hi Marcia, how are you?" He needed a second. I was the one who entered the door.
Yeah, that'd be very cool, but it's
He was teacher
hard.
at my university.
Yeah.
He used to teach special education.
Yeah, well, and then what'd you think, that they would end up in special ed, but I would think in some ways they'd be kind of done with that. If they progress through school, I'm gonna go be English, work in English or something. So, I'll find out, just to prove you wrong for sure.
Yeah, no, I just don't think that. and I think it's even a matter
but
of be thoughtful about it. Look what the path that
the deaf community is much more vociferous about the
sign language.
yes, and maybe it's because of the sign language difference.
The culture is
Yeah,
completely different.
culture and sign language is, I don't think that there's quite the same, feeling in the blind community, because it's more isolating, unfortunately. It tends to be more isolating, we don't have as big a support community.
And I think the culture
A little bit more
is very
dependent.
similar, and the coding, the information, the way that they code information is very similar to us.
Mhm.
Like the deaf is completely different, they
Right.
code information in a completely different way.
Yeah, language culture,
Yeah.
but,
A
I'll
lot of
find out.
criticism about captions for deaf people, that doesn't work, and how it works, they have to learn
Right.
to think differently.
Yeah, I'll find out just to make sure that I'm with you all, that, in my experience, very small number.
And I know it's not gonna change your decision, it's just a matter of having in your mind, be mindful.
In the world of all possible things, you would think it would be what percentage of the population with disabilities has a visual impairment? 1%, 2%?
Very, very low.
Something like that? That should be the percentage of teachers.
Yeah.
And then that should be the percentage of people in your neighborhood, and that should be the percentage of people in schools. So it may be low because the occurrence is low. So it may not be that there's bias, it's just occurrence.
Then off of that, if people, say we get the device used and it's helpful and it starts being used in classrooms, then the people who are learning it now might eventually become teachers.
Mhm.
So then they would have use with the device, and then they would potentially be able to teach with the device.
Optimistic as I am, I doubt our devices
Thinking
will
about
turn them into
teaching,
teachers.
Well, if you put it
I'm
up
just
right,
saying that
you
it's
make a
like-
very good point.
For teachers
Because
with
it's not-
disabilities.
A future direction study could be one of the children who use the device and learn something, teach another child.
I thought you were going to say a
The same-
longitudinal study to see
No,
them become
no.
teachers.
Well, longitudinal
Oh
studies I
God,
know.
I'm graduating.
I'm from development, my longitudinal studies is my land, but
So tutoring?
but we have this assumption that you only learn for teachers, and I am not, you know that.
Yeah.
You learn from each other all the time. So you have one study that you can do afterwards, if you guys have to do this after, like a master's or thesis or PhD, whatever, you're gonna follow up on this. You can do a follow-up when you teach one child, the other child, a blind child, will teach another child, and see what's the effect. And if you have a child who is not blind, you teach. So you can test this in different ways.
They have this for sighted students. My roommate, she's an education major, and she's working for a professor who's doing the same thing with sighted students. So they have reading buddies for English as a second language, and it's fourth graders paired with kindergartners.
It's a very cool.
And the fourth graders love it.
Yeah,
Oh my
that always
gosh.
works, those kind of things.
So you don't have to become a teacher to teach that. When you learn, you know how to do it, you can teach another child. That's
Well,
how they do in the streets.
that's also part of the
On the
aim
playground, they
of
teach
the
us.
non-testing. Like the graph or the drawing though, that's part of the aim. Because a teacher can draw a thing on a tablet and have it show up, but then you can also be at home or have another student draw something, or at some point when a child is old enough, I guess it's more maturity level of you draw something and then you can feel what you drew to make sure you really drew it right, and that gives the person more spatial awareness of where their hand is on paper as well.
Yeah, and it could conceivably again be
A
the
writing.
universal design, that
Yeah.
that's the case where typically sighted people could really
Benefit.
I like that device, I want to use that. That I would learn better that way, to have it be multimodal. I would have learned graphs better that way probably.
You never lose the perspective. I told you, I think the first time that we met, that I know a couple who, they're both blind and they have a sighted child. And they live in the same house.
Yeah, it's,
So they're both blind and they have a sighted child.
well, and
This
many,
child will grow up in a completely different learning environment.
and most people who are blind have grown up in a family with everybody else around them
Sighted, yeah,
who are sighted,
sighted,
so
yeah.
they've had a lot of, most
The other
times
way-
both.
The other way around, yeah.
Yeah, both lines. When you all, a lot of you met Ms. Rasmussen, who's my buddy, and it's really, it's interesting, you know, I took her home, right up to the house, pitch dark,
Doesn't
Yeah.
affect her.
you know, open the
So
door.
so
you know, yeah, you know, she just goes walking in, I would probably run into 4 things,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, it's just things you don't think about, but,
It's like in a very small scale, left-handed people growing up in the right-handed world.
yeah, right. Well, good work, and yeah.
You guys have done a good
Yeah,
job.
yeah, keep in touch, and I'll get you the vision teacher.
Thank you.
So it was really fun.
Can we have a quick aside just for, are there any, like, I know you say the methodology didn't have one, we were sort of under the impression that there weren't really, they didn't want as many citations in the methodology.
Oh, and I didn't really, this is the only, you guys did a good job, and everything else was kind of really the only thing I could even pick on, so, you know.
Was it?
Gotta say something. I mean,
Enough sources, good enough sources?
It's more just, I guess, documenting how you guys are making your decisions, that kind of thing. I mean, I'm not talking to do like a full-scale literature review on every method ever used. I mean, nothing like the extent that you did for your previous background stuff, but just, I mean, any sort of reasons that you're making certain decisions, I guess, or sort of good to just document. Yeah, and some of that stuff probably comes from some of the things you already used from your background anyway.
Yeah.
So if you're just talking about, you know, oh, we decided to do, like you were talking a minute ago about how should we use the swell paper or not in the original lessons, just say, oh, well, we talked to a bunch of teachers and they all said that's how they would traditionally teach this, so that's what we're gonna do. I mean, it's sort of like knowing that your methodology comes from somewhere. So.
And in the methodology, when you do not have a reference and you have to make an arbitrary decision, you just say that we arbitrarily choose.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can do that. If some of it's just like this sounded
The
really
number
good,
of
you can just
people.
say that sounds really
Because
good.
somebody can say, how did you decide this? Well, somebody needs to make a decision about it. We did.
Yeah.
We started and we tested out. And, well, of course, like when you do arbitrary decisions in general, you do a pre-test on field things to see what's going to work. And you can also say we have done and you put an appendix of a pilot, pre-pilot on this and test if what's going to work better. And you did work once.
Do you all have an I'm thinking now of talking to my vision teacher, do you have an abstract? Do you have a short version?
We have a really small abstract and then we have a, like, maybe page.
But there's
long
a meeting
page.
one for the public health day. 'Cause I'm
Can
from
you send me
public
one
health.
of
Yeah, they're gonna
those
send
little short things?
Yeah, sure.
When I talk to the vision teacher, I can just say, this is what they're doing.
And can I also ask, I think you're the only one who has just read a chunk of this for the first time.
Yes.
Was there, in terms of writing, a part that's lacking or?
No, it really,
Disconnected?
it was terrific, and,
Okay.
you know, it seemed very, much like a thesis.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It is a very ambitious project.
Yeah.
Like developing something, testing it out, and doing an experiment. It's
Yeah,
very
it was,
ambitious. It
you
is
know,
beyond PhD.
Yeah. Those are juniors.
Sophomores.
See?
And they come to me like they have all the literature
Yeah.
review and all this.
Yeah, it's very, very.
They're grad students, they don't have papers with
Yeah, well, that's what I said about yeah, and
I have graduate students.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I
I know you
know.
know.
You're right.
I'm very proud of that, the document was very good.
Yeah.
And compelling, and I buy it.
Literally with money? Can we
Yeah.
have it?
I got one reference.
Well, I'm pushing them out to write a 10-page, reducing this to 10 pages and put like in a grant model. And in a very concise, precise, so we can submit to some agencies. And see. That's gonna be
There should be money out there.
So we're gonna get
There's
a
always something. We just
foundation,
have to find
a
it.
donor.
So
You already have a donation fund for us.
I got a Christmas donation from my brother. That was my Christmas present. Team HAPTIC. Dedicated.
Yeah, we was thinking about doing some donors as well.
GoFundMe. We're gonna
Kickstarter.
have a
Good
Kickstarter.
job. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are people free to stay and talk for like 10 minutes?
I have to be at the project sheet.
Gross.
Yeah.
I think this was good.
And then the following year,
Oh, yeah.
No, they have one.
yeah.
Bye-bye.